Okay, the first speaker for the negative. He goes by many names, but you probably know him as the cat in the hat. He recently revealed that he travelled all the way to Paris simply not to see the Mona Lisa. So he may have a fairly loose grasp of geography, but his art mind is a bear trap of pain for the unwary. But ladies and gentlemen, Jack Randall.
Occasionally, I paint in a representational fashion. I've painted a nude that will make your pulse race. And I've painted a black snake that will make you squirm with discomfort. And I've also painted a nude with a black snake that may only leave your imagination a little sicker than mine. I've painted portraits in my career for a variety of reasons, and I will propose that folks who can't paint can and should paint portraits. I will demonstrate that there are a range of reasons to paint portraits. I will demonstrate a range of methods for doing so. I'll draw your attention to my PowerPoint. It's not synced necessarily with what I say, but it's going to reference from time to time what's in my notes. So, for the methods of painting a portrait, skill is but one. My highly creative and learned fellow team members will carry this argument to its inevitable conclusion, which will have you thumbing the tip of your car keys, waiting to get home and pop the top of that can of enamel in your garden shed so that you can whip up a portrait to replace that god-awful mirror that you have in the hallway. And I'll explain to you that that's a valid process. I'd like to, for the benefit of my learned colleagues on this side as well as my own team, I'd like to conduct a little audience survey. So would you raise your hand if you can sing? Please raise your hand if you can sing. Thank you. Okay. Can you write 9 people? And now would you raise your hand if you can dance? I got 15. And now would you raise your hand if you can paint? You got 10. Now, if I ask this question, or this set of questions of a room full of 5-year-olds, I think you would agree that I would unanimously get 100%. Everybody at 5 knows how to sing, dance and paint. So what's happened? Why have you unlearned that skill? It's not that you've lost interest. The Archibald Prize is a blockbuster show. We will all see it and form an opinion, pick our favourite. But I'll propose that the motivation to creativity will trump specialisation every time. I'd like to share with you some anecdotes about some portraits I've painted. When I was 17 years old, still a high school student, I got a job on the silos at Mirrabah during the harvest. And in conversation on the first morning, sweeping old wheat, I let it slip. When asked what was I going to do after I left school, I let it slip that I was going to be an artist. It was a bad move. Ray, the agent, got wind of this indiscretion on my part and on at Smoko. He said, so you're an artist? Here, draw Soapy. And he gave me his spiral flip pad and a biro. And so I was on the spot. Soapy and Dave stared coolly at me over the top of their daily mirrors and watched me squirm. But by the end of Smoko, I called the bluff with the biro and could muster under such duress to prove that 3 awkward, untrained drawings that I no longer wanted to be an artist. I was one. I got some training after that and did some more portraits. There was a friend of mine during university, during my second failed attempt at university, and he wore stripy overalls. And he turned up at this party with this drop-dead gorgeous bird. And I was enamoured of her straight away. And it changed my opinion seriously about him in particular, because I thought he was gay up until that point. And the only, one of my responses to the beauty of this girl was to draw her portrait for him, which I did. It's another form of duress, if you like, but it's a different reason to make a portrait. And it was satisfactory. It was a likeness, but it had some appeal about the way I felt about this goddess. But a short time later, she flipped, and she became really angry and got quite nasty. And so the person that I'd actually drawn wasn't the person on the paper for me anymore. So I stole into their apartment and got the drawing back and tore it up. And, because it no longer represented the visage that I first saw. Another occasion, I was drawn to paint the portrait of a good friend of mine, Mervyn Bishop. And he came to the studio and sat, and we talked for a while. You've got to talk for a fair while with Mervyn. And when he went away, when he came back for the first viewing, he said, "You made me look drunk." And I'm thinking, well, there's a reason why your eyes are orange, because there's a blue background, and there's a whole bunch of science why that is so. But in response to his response to his own visage, I needed to change his eyes. And of course, he changed a small bit of a painting, and the rest of it's got to be changed as well. So the painting now exists with Mervyn in his happy, jolly self, but not with those eyes. There's another occasion where I was drawn to make portraits of people on a community centre, and this will actually prove my point that it's not skill that's required to make a portrait. The second last slide there, I think it's gone now, but shows a picture on a house of David Peachy, and I mapped the thanks Andrew. I mapped the colours in these people. That's Ellen Dillon on the right, David Peachy on the left. There were good reasons that weren't mine for using those people on that image. And once the colour map was drawn onto the building, I had the kids of the neighbourhood come around and paint their picture. David Peachy loves it. Ellen Dillon is okay with it. But it actually proves my point that unskilled people can make a portrait. So I'll conclude with the statement and that image that the creative impulse and the drive to express that impulse is much stronger than the desire to acquire the skills necessary to express that impulse. Skill may or may not come later. Thank you very much.
She has her digits in so many pies, she hasn't been able to wear stockings since she was 23. A trained speaker on the rural circuit, she can bleat in 5 different languages, including the alpaca. She's an artist and the only woman for the entire night. She has 2 names and 1 initial. Ladies and gentlemen, Kim V. Goldsmith.
I was only reminiscing about the last time I debated, and it was wearing a school uniform standing in a boys' school. So, yeah, different audience tonight, and I appreciate you dressing up for the occasion.
Far less appreciated.
And we didn't have technology like this when I last debated either, so I'm just hoping that I can work it for you. Well, I plan to convince you that anyone with a shred of creativity can paint portraits. Now, a slight warning here, I may use the term paint rather loosely in my argument. Now, a Greek dude of big ideas, Aristotle once said the aim of art is to represent not the outward appearance of things, but the inward significance. And there is no doubt that the quest to imitate reality has been with us since ancient times. Now, I am using a slideshow tonight, and that's to show you a few of the characters of my argument. A few hundred years after Aristotle, Roman history buff and man about town, Pliny the Elder, who's not to be confused with Pliny the Younger, who was his nephew, he wrote a bestseller called Naturalis Historia, and the one that followed up was Naturalis Hysteria. But in Naturalis Historia, he told a yarn about a couple of Greek chaps, Zeuxis and Parrhasius, who were the heavyweights of the 5th century art world of Greece. They had a competition to see who was the best artist. Zeuxis painted a bunch of grapes so real that the pesky pigeons flew out of the sky to eat the grapes. Thinking he had it in the bag, he asked Parrhasius, "Please reveal your painting," only to discover Parrhasius had indeed painted the curtain. So it is reported that Zeuxis actually said that he deceived the birds, but Parrhasius deceived him. It was really just trickery, an illusion. It makes one wonder what is real, or is it just plain, simple deception? Oscar Wilde once said that no great artist ever sees things as they really are, and if he did, he would cease to be an artist. Those artists not yet great and uncertain of their talent for realism might take a leaf out of Bryn's book. We all know who Bryn is? Oh, we do now, good. Well, you don't need too many words to describe who Bryn is, really. Fake it until you make it. Now, when I was studying art a few years ago, I was taught how to fake being an art expert. I was wondering whether the person who taught me that would be in the room tonight, and guess what? He is. I'll leave you guessing on that note. It's about sounding like you believe it, using the right words and stealing all the information you can. The disclaimer to this advice was that real experts back their opinions with knowledge, so consider what I tell you next as knowledgeable opinion. It's one thing to fake it as an expert, but can you fake it as an artist? Take Tuscan Mick, for example, and I won't confuse him with Tuscan Mike, but we'll call this guy Tuscan Mick, or Michelangelo. He was a big, fat fake. Surprise, surprise. Michelangelo actually thought of himself not as a painter, but as a sculptor. He felt he was born with a chisel in his hand. In fact, I read a story that he believed that he imbibed marble in his mother's milk. Now, his arch rival, Raphael, didn't think much of Michelangelo as a painter either. There was a bit of artistic, professional jealousy at play. Now, Raphael had a nephew called Bramante, who happened to be the Vatican's architect. And Bramante actually recommended Michelangelo for the job of painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Pope Julius II was in charge of making those decisions in those days, and I think poor old Tuscan Mick was set up in one of those workplace pranks that could have gone wrong, particularly given he'd given up the chisel to take up the paintbrush for this job. But who do you think ended up with egg on their face? I think poor old Bramante and Raphael probably thought that this particular joke may have backfired, because to cut a long story short, and that was 4 years of a long story, I don't think the paint job on the Sistine Chapel ceiling was all that shabby, and in fact it has been described as possibly being one of the world's greatest art treasures. So, what do you think of expert opinion in this case, even if you are the Vatican's architect? Van Gogh supposedly said, if you hear a voice within you say you cannot paint, by all means paint, and that voice will be silenced. Well, I hope he wasn't paying too much for the therapy he received when he got that information, because I don't think it really helped him all that much. And it's interesting that Mark raised a point in his delivery about how the creativity was beaten out of him by the age of 23. Perhaps you should have taken a leaf out of Van Gogh's book and the outcomes might have been quite remarkable.
Yeah, a couple of years off. Can't do critics then, can you?
As Tuscan Mick, who preferred his men in stone, probably agreed, who needs paint anyway? There are plenty of other options out there when you want to create a portrait. Coffee, pencil shadings, quilting fabric, I included that one for my mother, wood, mud, sand, moss, nails and tape. And by the way, is anybody going to tell that guy with the hammer in his hand that he can't do a portrait? Won't be me anyway. The possibilities are endless when you don't worry about what the experts say. There is no must in art because art is free, said Kandinsky. I like the sentiment, including the one on the slideshow. And Mark, I don't know what dictionary you actually get your definitions out of these days, but I think they're as outdated as your opinions on what is art and what is I ask you, should portraiture be left to those who think they can paint? Who says they aren't faking it? And whose reality is it that they are seeing? Now, Mike stalled in his argument for quite a while, flattering us all instead. And he had the simple opinion that the majority of the public prefer realism. I'll leave it to you to decide which is the knowledgeable opinion, and I'll also leave you with the words of Rousseau. The world of reality has its limits. The world of imagination is boundless. Thank you.
To the last speaker for the negative. He's never known a haircut he didn't agree with, and will defend an artwork simply because the rest of the world condemns it. Known throughout the region as the soul of art, or at least is commonly referred to as the art soul at the WPCC, at least I think they're talking about here. Ladies and gentlemen, Kent Buchanan.
I must just say at the beginning that I did have a semantic issue with the question, because I actually agree that a person who can't paint shouldn't pretend to paint. I think that a person who can't paint should attempt to paint. And that's probably a distinction I need to make. I don't think anyone should pretend to do anything. Reality is never enough. We all have centuries of creative endeavour to back that up. If reality was enough, there'd be no books, there'd be no artworks, there'd be no music, etc. Art has the potential for us to leave reality and think and reflect upon the world in which we live. The difference between having a skill in one area and following it through to its logical conclusion is not as simple as it seems. The so-called rules of making art are to make something look like the subject that you're painting. But of course, artists, as the kinds of people they are, part of the human nature, rules are meant to be broken. Whatever rules we have, we will dismantle those rules, we will turn those rules around, we will graffiti those rules, we'll turn them upside down, but the rules will still remain. And it's human beings' ability to think beyond those rules that creates art, creates creative endeavour. To paint in a representational way is a talent. To paint in a way that may not be representational, that may be abstract, but moves us, is a talent. To paint something lifelike is kind of a Western hangout. The history of art has proved that we have looked at the same things over and over again, and we managed to come up with many, many different visions of that thing. I'll go back to a comment that Jack made as well, that as children, we do dance and we sing and we draw. As children, we have a primordial impulse to communicate. It's not about making art, it's about saying something to someone else. As we get older, other things are forced in front of us and told that these things are more important. But our desire to communicate never ends. The problem is not art, the problem is us. We need to get back to that same place. We should attempt to return to the naive, unaffected state of childhood when we view art. We should read images as we once did and not how we have been fashioned by society to see it. We should look at art and look for something more than just what we're looking at. We should be feeling what the artist is trying to make us feel. If we look at Dutch still life, where painters are producing beautifully realistic paintings of a still life of fruit, it's never that simple. It's never just a still life of fruit. There is always something more happening in that painting. There is metaphor in that painting that we, as people who view it, read. But of course, that's not lost on the artist as well. The artist is not drawing that painting a still life just for the hell of it. They're drawing it because they want to be communicating something more than that. One of the paintings in the Archibald Prize is by the Melbourne painter Mark Ford. It's an incredibly meticulously painted object. The work depicts the artist cloaked in a white sheet with his baggage over his shoulders. That is beautifully painted. But it doesn't actually engage with the notion of portraiture in the ways that we would maybe hope. But of course the question that work throws up makes us think about portraiture. The beauty of the Archibald Prize is that we agree and we disagree. To agree or disagree is quite simple, but really it's not enough. The gulf between liking something and not liking something is huge. And it's that space in between that we all can come together and talk. Art never hurt anyone. So for us to get together and say, I don't like it because, and for someone else to say, I like it because, we're learning from each other. It's a democratic prize. It's chosen, the winner is chosen by the trustees of the Art Gallery of New South Wales. The trustees, in the most part, are not artists. They're not even in the art world. They're business people. And they're seen by the Art Gallery of New South Wales as representative of the people. Anything that is in the Archibald Prize is a portrait. That's been decided by many people before us. The ability to be able to express something about a person, whether it's the way that they look or whether it's something about them, is an incredible thing. When speaking to children, I talk to them about what a portrait can be. And there's a number of paintings in that exhibition that questions what a portrait is. And as an example for children, I use the example of, say, everyone had a grandfather who wore a hat. And that grandfather probably always wore that hat. No one could do a painting of that hat. And that hat, in a sense, is a portrait of that person. So we should never be restricted by the reality in which we live. We shouldn't become comfortable with just the way something looks. If we were comfortable and stuck to those kinds of familiar things, we'd never go on holidays. We'd never go and search out other things. If we decided that the reality that we lived in and what we were able to achieve was enough, we would never have learned to fly. There's a quote that I'm always struck by, and I'm going to end on that. And it's by an English minimalist artist named Carl Andre. And for me, it kind of sums up what art is and what it can be, and why people do what they do when they make art. A man climbs a mountain because it is there. An artist creates an artwork because it's not there. Thank you.